The 11th time Ethan Morrell showed up in the nurse's office that semester, nobody believed anything was really wrong with him. Not the teachers, not the administrators, and certainly not the staff members who assumed the quiet 11-year-old was simply looking for attention. But Avery Collins knew better. The plus-size school nurse had spent years caring for children whose pain didn't appear on medical charts. As Ethan sat on the examination bed, nervously twisting the sleeve of his expensive academy blazer, Avery noticed something nobody else seemed to see. His stomach wasn't hurting. His heart was. And when she gently asked whether he had eaten lunch, the boy's eyes filled with tears before he could stop them. That was the moment Avery realized one of the richest children in New York might also be one of the loneliest. Unfortunately, someone else had just learned her name. Victor Morrell, the most feared mafia boss in New York, and he wanted to know why his son kept talking about a school nurse. Avery Collins had learned something important during her 8 years as a school nurse. Children almost never lied about being hurt. Adults simply misunderstood where the pain was coming from. Every morning, she walked through the polished halls of St. Augustine Academy, one of Manhattan's most prestigious private schools. The academy catered to the children of celebrities, billionaires, politicians, and executives. On the surface, everything looked perfect. The uniforms were immaculate. The classrooms were state-of-the-art. The tuition cost more than most people's yearly salaries. But Avery knew money had a way of hiding problems instead of solving them. Especially when those problems lived inside a child's heart. At 34 years old, Avery stood out in a world obsessed with appearances. She was a plus-size woman with soft curves, round cheeks, and a warm smile that often arrived before her words did. She wasn't glamorous, she wasn't fashionable, and she certainly didn't look like the elegant mothers who stepped out of luxury SUVs every morning wearing designer sunglasses. Some parents looked right through her. Others assumed she lacked ambition. A few treated her with thinly disguised pity. Avery had grown used to it. What mattered to her were the children, and no child worried her more than Ethan Morrell. The first time he'd visited her office, he complained of headaches. The second time, nausea. Then stomach pain. Then dizziness. Then exhaustion. Each symptom was different, but the sadness behind his eyes never changed. That afternoon, Ethan sat quietly in the chair across from her desk. His dark hair was slightly messy. His uniform was perfect. His shoes probably cost more than Avery's monthly grocery budget. Yet he looked utterly miserable. Avery handed him a juice box. "Try this." "Thanks." His voice was barely above a whisper. Avery sat beside him rather than across from him. Children opened up more when they didn't feel interrogated. "Did you eat breakfast?" He nodded. "Lunch?" A longer pause, then a shrug. Avery wasn't surprised. "Nobody to eat with?" Ethan stared at the floor. That silence told her everything. The boy wasn't being bullied exactly. Isolation was often harder to spot, and sometimes even crueler. Eventually, Ethan spoke. "My mom used to make pancakes every Friday." Avery's heart squeezed. There it was. The real wound. His mother. She had died 2 years earlier after a sudden illness. The entire city had attended the funeral. News outlets had covered it for days. But public sympathy faded quickly. Children carried grief much longer. "What were her pancakes like?" Avery asked softly. For the first time all day, Ethan smiled. A real smile. Terrible. Avery laughed. "Terrible? They always burned. They couldn't have been that bad." "They were." His smile grew wider. "But she always said burned pancakes had more personality." Avery smiled too. Sometimes healing started with letting a child remember, not fixing the pain, just making room for it. For 20 minutes, Ethan talked about his mother, his favorite memories, the songs she sang, the books she read, the way she always knew when he was pretending to be okay. When the conversation ended, the color had returned to his face. His stomachache had magically disappeared. Funny how often that happened. As Ethan prepared to leave, he hesitated near the doorway. "Miss Collins? Yes? Do you think my dad misses her?" The question hit harder than Avery expected. She chose her words carefully. "I think people can miss someone very much and still have trouble showing it." Ethan looked down. He's always working. Avery knew exactly who his father was. Everyone did. Victor Morel, a name spoken in whispers throughout New York. Officially, he owned shipping companies, construction firms, and investment groups. Unofficially, rumors followed him everywhere. People feared him, respected him, avoided him. The stories surrounding the Morel empire felt larger than life. Yet none of that mattered to the lonely boy standing in front of her. To Ethan, Victor wasn't a powerful man. He was simply a father who wasn't there. "Maybe he doesn't know how much you need him," Avery said gently. Ethan looked unconvinced. Then the bell rang. The school day was ending. As he walked out, Avery noticed something. His shoulders looked slightly lighter. Just slightly. Sometimes that was enough. But across Manhattan, inside a glass tower overlooking the Hudson River, Victor Morel was ending a meeting worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The 42-year-old mafia boss sat at the head of a conference table while executives nervously waited for his approval. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed. Victor possessed the kind of presence that made grown men choose their words carefully. His cold gray eyes rarely revealed emotion. Ever since losing his wife, he had buried himself in work. Business was easier than grief. Control was easier than loss. His phone vibrated. He glanced down. A message from Ethan's school counselor. A routine report. Most of it was forgettable, until one line caught his attention. "Ethan continues to show positive emotional responses after meetings with Nurse Avery Collins." Victor frowned. Then he read the sentence again. Who was Avery Collins, and why was his son suddenly talking about her? Victor Morel did not trust coincidences. That mindset had helped him build an empire. It had also kept him alive. For nearly 20 years, he had survived in a world where hidden motives lurked behind every smile, and every act of kindness came with a price tag attached. So when he noticed his son mentioning the same person repeatedly, his instincts immediately activated. Avery Collins, the school nurse. At first, it seemed harmless. Then Victor noticed something else. Ethan was changing. The boy smiled more often. He complained less. For the first time since his mother's death, there were moments when he looked almost happy. Most parents would have celebrated that. Victor became suspicious. Late one evening, he sat alone inside his penthouse office overlooking Manhattan. The city lights stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls. A crystal tumbler rested untouched beside him. His attention remained fixed on the report in front of him. A routine school wellness summary. Avery's name appeared 3 times. Victor's jaw tightened. People rarely entered his son's life without wanting something, especially when that son carried the Morel name. He pressed a button on his desk. A moment later, his longtime advisor stepped into the room. Gabriel Russo had worked beside Victor for almost 15 years. He knew better than anyone how Victor's mind worked. "You needed me?" Victor slid the report across the desk. "I want information." Gabriel glanced down. "A school nurse? I want information." Gabriel nodded. That meant the discussion was over. 24 hours later, a file appeared on Victor's desk. He opened it. What he found was surprisingly ordinary. Avery Collins, 34 years old, school nurse. No criminal history, no suspicious financial activity, no lawsuits, no scandals, no hidden connections, nothing. Victor frowned. That bothered him more than discovering a secret would have. Nobody was that clean. Nobody. He studied the photograph attached to the report. Avery stood outside the academy during a charity event. She wore a simple navy blue cardigan and comfortable shoes. Her plus-size figure was impossible to miss among the slim socialites surrounding her. She wasn't glamorous, She wasn't trying to be. She looked normal. Victor hated how much that unsettled him. The next week brought an unexpected opportunity. The academy hosted a parent appreciation event. Victor rarely attended school functions. Usually, assistants handled those responsibilities. But this time, he showed up personally. The arrival alone caused a ripple through the building. Parents whispered. Teachers straightened their posture. Administrators suddenly became eager to help. Victor was used to that reaction. Power always arrived before he did. As he moved through the crowded hallway, his attention landed on a woman standing near a bulletin board covered with student artwork, Avery Collins. Even from a distance, he recognized her. She was speaking with a nervous little girl. The child looked upset. Avery crouched slightly, despite the obvious discomfort it caused her knees. She listened patiently. No rushing, no distractions, no performance, just genuine attention. A few moments later, the girl smiled and walked away. Victor watched the interaction carefully. Something felt unusual, not manipulative, not strategic, just sincere. Still, he refused to trust appearances. As Avery turned, she nearly walked directly into him. For a brief second, surprise flashed across her face. Then it disappeared. Unlike everyone else in the building, she didn't look intimidated. That alone irritated him. Mr. Morel. Her voice remained calm. You know who I am. A small smile appeared. It's difficult not to. Most people would have sounded nervous saying that. Avery didn't. Victor studied her. Up close, she looked even less like the kind of woman he had imagined. There were no designer clothes, no carefully crafted image, no attempt to impress him. No, she simply looked like someone who had spent her day taking care of children. You're Avery Collins. I am. My son speaks about you often. Avery's expression softened instantly. The change was impossible to miss. Not because Victor was standing there, because Ethan's name had been mentioned. He's a wonderful kid. Victor felt an unexpected flash of irritation. Wonderful. The word sounded personal. Too personal. Is he? Avery looked directly at him. Yes. No hesitation. No calculation. Just certainty. Victor folded his arms. What exactly happens during these visits? Avery immediately recognized the tone. Protective father. Suspicious father. Possibly dangerous father. I listen. Victor waited. She continued. Sometimes, children need someone to listen. That's your professional assessment? It is. Victor's eyes narrowed. My son has access to therapists. Therapists are wonderful. And yet he keeps coming to you. Avery understood the accusation hidden beneath the words. She had seen it before, not from mafia bosses, from wealthy parents. Parents who assumed affection could be purchased. You think I'm encouraging it? Victor said nothing. His silence answered for him. Avery folded her hands. Mr. Morel, Ethan doesn't visit because I'm special. Then why? The answer came quietly. Because he's lonely. The words landed harder than either of them expected. Victor's expression darkened immediately. Lonely. The accusation felt personal, almost insulting. I provide everything he needs. Avery's eyes softened. And somehow that felt worse than criticism. Children need more than things. For a moment, absolute silence settled between them. The most feared mafia boss in New York stood face to face with a school nurse who wasn't afraid of him. And for the first time in years, someone had spoken a truth he didn't want to hear. Then Avery glanced toward the hallway. Ethan was standing there, watching them. Hope filled the boy's eyes, as though he believed his father had come to see him. Victor followed his son's gaze, and suddenly realized something that unsettled him deeply. Ethan looked happier standing near Avery than he had looked standing beside his own father in months. Victor tried to forget the conversation. He failed. For the next several days, Avery Collins remained lodged in the back of his mind. Not because he trusted her, because he didn't. And yet every attempt to uncover hidden motives had produced nothing. No suspicious bank deposits, no connections to journalists, no ties to rival families, no attempts to approach him socially, no effort to benefit from Ethan's last name. Nothing. The more Victor looked, the less sense it made. Meanwhile, someone else had started paying attention. Victoria Morell, Victor's younger sister. Elegant, intelligent, dangerous. Unlike Victor, Victoria wore her ambition openly. She moved comfortably through New York's elite circles, collecting favors and influence the way others collected jewelry. And ever since Ethan's mother died, Victoria had been positioning herself for one goal: custody. Officially, she claimed she wanted what was best for her nephew. Privately, she believed Victor was emotionally incapable of raising him. The boy needed stability, structure, family. At least, that was the story she told everyone. The truth was more complicated. Control had always mattered to Victoria, and Ethan represented the future of the Morell legacy, the future of billions of dollars, the future of enormous influence, a future she desperately wanted to shape. One afternoon, she attended a charity luncheon hosted by several Academy board members. The event was filled with wealthy parents, donors, and school officials, the kind of people who exchanged smiles while quietly destroying each other's reputations. Victoria excelled in those environments. Halfway through the luncheon, she heard a familiar name: Avery Collins. She remained silent, listening. A board member smiled. "She's wonderful with the children." Another nodded. "Especially Ethan." Victoria's expression never changed, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. Interesting. Very interesting. Later that evening, she requested a private meeting with the Academy's head administrator. Not an unusual request. The Morell family donated millions every year. People rarely said no. The meeting lasted less than 30 minutes. Victoria asked polite questions, friendly questions, harmless questions, questions that sounded innocent. How often did Ethan visit the nurse's office? How close were they? How much unsupervised time did they spend together? Were professional boundaries always maintained? The administrator answered comfortably. At first. Then a subtle discomfort began creeping into the conversation, exactly as Victoria intended. Because she wasn't making accusations, not directly. She was planting possibilities. The most effective lies always started as questions. A week later, whispers began appearing throughout the Academy. Small whispers, tiny ones, easy to dismiss. Some parents wondered whether Avery had become too involved with Ethan. Others questioned whether she was behaving more like family than school staff. Most people ignored the gossip, at first, but rumors are like cracks in glass. Once they appear, people can't stop looking at them. Avery sensed the change before she understood it. The smiles from some parents became shorter. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. A few teachers avoided eye contact. Something felt wrong. One morning, she entered the faculty lounge and noticed silence immediately filling the room. Everyone suddenly found reasons to stare at their coffee cups. Her stomach sank. She knew that silence. Most people did. It was the silence of being discussed, the silence of being judged, the silence that appeared before exclusion. Avery pretended not to notice, but it hurt, more than she wanted to admit. Growing up, she had experienced plenty of judgment. Being the overweight girl in school had taught her that people often formed opinions before learning your name. Children could be cruel. Adults were simply more subtle. Sometimes, the old insecurities returned faster than she expected. Maybe they think I'm unprofessional. Maybe they think I crossed a line. Maybe they're right. But every time those thoughts surfaced, Ethan appeared. And she remembered why she stayed. A few days later, Ethan arrived at her office, carrying a folded drawing. "I made this." Avery opened it carefully. The picture showed 3 people, Him, his mother, and Avery. Her heart nearly stopped. "You drew me?" Ethan nodded. "You help me when I miss her." The words hit with devastating force, not because they were inappropriate, because they were honest. Avery blinked rapidly, fighting tears. Children often revealed truths. Adults spent years hiding. She carefully folded the drawing. "Thank you." Ethan smiled, and for a brief moment, everything felt normal again. Until the following afternoon, the first public attack arrived. A parent meeting was underway inside the academy auditorium. Faculty members sat near the stage. Several board members occupied the front rows. Avery attended because attendance was mandatory. She expected budget discussions, fundraising updates, routine announcements. Instead, a woman stood near the microphone, one of the wealthiest mothers in the school, and someone closely connected to Victoria Morell. The woman smiled politely, then asked a question that changed everything. "I'd like clarification regarding staff boundaries." The room grew quiet. The board chairman nodded. "What, specifically?" The woman glanced directly toward Avery. "Is it considered appropriate for a school nurse to develop unusually personal relationships with vulnerable students from influential families?" The silence that followed felt enormous. Every eye in the room turned toward Avery, every single one. Her face drained of color. Someone had just fired the opening shot, and suddenly she understood. This wasn't gossip anymore. It was a campaign. The accusations spread through the academy faster than anyone expected. By Monday morning, Avery could feel it everywhere. In the hallways, in the faculty lounge, even in the parking lot. Nobody confronted her directly. That would have required courage. Instead, people whispered. They stared. They speculated. And somehow, those quiet moments hurt more than open hostility. Avery arrived at work carrying her usual oversized tote bag and a cup of coffee she barely touched. The moment she stepped into the main building, she noticed two parents speaking near the front office. Both women immediately stopped talking when they saw her. Then came the awkward smiles. The fake smiles. The kind that said everything without saying a word. Avery lowered her eyes and continued walking. Her chest felt tight. By lunchtime, things became worse. A social media post appeared inside a private parents group. Nobody publicly mentioned Avery by name, but they didn't need to. Everyone knew who the post referred to. The anonymous author questioned whether certain staff members had become emotionally dependent on wealthy students. Others began commenting, speculating, judging. One parent suggested Avery enjoyed the attention. Another implied she was trying to secure a future position within an influential family. A third questioned why a nurse spent so much time with one child. Every comment felt like another stone thrown at someone who wasn't there to defend herself. By evening, screenshots were circulating everywhere. The academy administration could no longer ignore it. 2 days later, Avery was called into a meeting. The head administrator sat across from her. His expression was uncomfortable, embarrassed, almost apologetic. That made Avery nervous immediately. "Avery," he paused. "We've received concerns." Her stomach dropped. "What kind of concerns?" He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printed emails, parent complaints, screenshots, anonymous statements, rumors disguised as concerns. Avery's face turned pale. She read every page. Then read them again. The accusations were absurd, yet seeing them written down somehow made them feel real. One message claimed she was manipulating Ethan emotionally. Another suggested she had become obsessed with the Morell family. One even implied she hoped to gain access to Victor's fortune. Avery almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. She had never asked Victor for anything, never attended a social event, never accepted gifts, never crossed professional boundaries. And yet, none of that mattered. Rumors rarely depended on truth. The administrator cleared his throat. "We're required to investigate." 1. The words felt like a punch. Investigate what? Nothing has been proven. Because there's nothing to prove. I know that. But his expression revealed another truth. He wasn't sure everyone else believed it. Avery left the office feeling numb. Outside, rain had started falling across Manhattan. She sat in her car for nearly 20 minutes before driving home. For the first time in years, she wondered whether she should quit. Not because she was guilty, because she was exhausted. People always talked about how strong kindness was. They rarely talked about how lonely it could become. Meanwhile, another person was beginning to notice the consequences. Ethan. Children always noticed more than adults realized. The next afternoon, he entered Avery's office carrying his backpack. But he didn't sit down immediately. He looked worried, scared. "Aren't you feeling sick today?" Avery asked gently. He shook his head. "Then, why are you here?" His answer shattered her heart. "They're talking about you." Avery froze. Ethan looked down at his shoes. "I heard some parents." The silence that followed was painful. Avery forced a smile. "Adults gossip sometimes. They said you're using me." His voice cracked. The words felt wrong coming from an 11-year-old. A child should never have to repeat things like that. Especially not about someone he trusted. Avery moved beside him. "You know that's not true, right?" Ethan nodded immediately. Too quickly. As if he feared she might disappear if he hesitated. "You're my friend." The simple statement nearly brought tears to her eyes. Not because she wanted friendship, because Ethan needed one. And somewhere along the way, she had become that person. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan asked the question she had been dreading. "Are they going to make you leave?" Avery couldn't answer. Because she didn't know. That uncertainty terrified her. Across the city, Victor Morel was having his own conversation. His sister sat across from him inside a private restaurant. Victoria sipped wine elegantly, every movement carefully controlled. "I heard the school is investigating that nurse." Nurse. Victor's expression remained unreadable. "So?" "Ha." Victoria smiled. "So maybe it's necessary." Victor said nothing. Victoria continued. "People become attached to wealthy families all the time. Still nothing. Especially people who think they deserve more than life gave them." Something about the comment bothered him. Deeply. He remembered Avery standing in that hallway. Remembered her calm confidence. Remembered how little she seemed to care about his status. It didn't fit. None of it fit. Yet he couldn't explain why. Victoria leaned forward. For Ethan's protection, perhaps some distance would be healthy. Victor stared at his sister. For the first time, he found himself asking a question he hadn't considered before. What if Avery wasn't the problem? What if someone else was? The following morning, the academy delivered devastating news. A formal board review had been scheduled. Avery's employment status would be discussed. Her future at the school now depended on a public hearing. And suddenly, the woman who had spent years protecting children had nobody left protecting her. The night before the board review, Victor Morel couldn't sleep. That was unusual. Men like Victor rarely lost sleep. When problems appeared, he solved them. When threats emerged, he eliminated them. When uncertainty arrived, he found answers. But Avery Collins had become a question he couldn't answer. And Victor hated unanswered questions. At 2 o'clock in the morning, he found himself standing outside Ethan's bedroom. The mansion was silent. Moonlight spilled through the tall windows. Victor slowly pushed the door open. Ethan was asleep, or at least pretending to be. The boy's eyes opened immediately. "Dad?" Victor stepped inside. For a moment, neither spoke. Conversations between them had become awkward over the years. Not hostile, just distant, like strangers trying to remember how to be family. Victor sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "Can't sleep?" Ethan shrugged. Neither could. The silence stretched. Then Victor asked a question he hadn't planned to ask. "Do you like Nurse Collins?" Ethan's response was immediate. Yes. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just certainty. Victor felt something tighten inside his chest. Why? 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 Ethan looked confused, as though the answer should have been obvious. Because she cares. The words landed harder than any accusation ever could. Victor forced himself to continue. What does she do? At first, Ethan struggled to explain. Children often did. They felt things long before they could describe them, but eventually the words started coming. And once they started, they didn't stop. Victor listened. Really listened. Perhaps for the first time in years, Ethan told him about the lunches. Not because Avery bought food, because she noticed when he skipped meals. He told him about the days he sat alone during recess, the days Avery quietly encouraged other students to include him, never forcing, never embarrassing him, just helping. He told him about panic attacks, the nightmares after his mother's death. The mornings he sat in the nurse's office because he couldn't stop crying. Victor felt his stomach twist. He had never known, not one word, not one detail, not one tear. And then came the worst part. Dad. Ethan looked down. When Mom died, everybody kept asking how you were doing. Victor froze. Nobody had ever said it out loud before. They asked about Grandma, about Aunt Victoria, about the company. His voice became smaller. But nobody asked me. The room felt suffocating. Victor stared at his son, the lonely little boy he loved more than life itself, the boy he had spent 2 years protecting from every danger except the one living inside his own heart. And suddenly Victor saw the truth. He had provided security, money, luxury, opportunity, everything except the thing Ethan needed most, him. The realization hurt. God, it hurt. Then Ethan quietly added, Miss Collins asked. Victor closed his eyes. For the first time in years, shame settled heavily on his shoulders. The next morning, Victor requested something he almost never requested. Crods. Every interaction involving Ethan and Avery, every counseling referral, every incident report, every communication, nothing hidden, nothing filtered. Within hours, a stack of files appeared on his desk. Victor began reading, and with every page, his guilt deepened. He discovered that Avery had noticed Ethan's grief almost immediately. Before counselors, before teachers, before family members, before him. She documented behavioral changes, withdrawal, anxiety, isolation, sleep issues, academic decline. All the signs had been there. Victor simply hadn't seen them. Then came another file, a bullying report. Victor's hands tightened. Apparently several boys had mocked Ethan during lunch, not because of his father, because he cried, because he missed his mother. One student had called him weak. Another called him broken. Victor felt cold fury rising inside him. But what caught his attention next was Avery's response. She never escalated the situation publicly, never humiliated the children. Instead, she worked quietly with teachers and counselors. The behavior stopped. Ethan never even knew how much effort she invested. Victor kept reading. Then another document appeared. Academic intervention notes. Ethan's grades had begun slipping months earlier. Again, Avery noticed first. She coordinated support, tutoring, teacher meetings, progress reviews. Things completely outside her job description. Things nobody asked her to do. Things she gained absolutely nothing from. Victor sat back slowly. His office suddenly felt very quiet. A thought entered his mind, one that made him deeply uncomfortable. Avery Collins had done more to help his son heal than anyone else in Ethan's life, including him. The realization was devastating. But the final discovery shattered him completely. Near the bottom of the pile sat a sealed envelope. Inside was a drawing, the same drawing Ethan had given Avery. Victor stared at it. 3 people, Ethan, his mother, Avery, attached, was a note written in Ethan's childish handwriting. Miss Collins makes me feel like Mom didn't disappear completely. Victor's vision blurred. For several seconds he couldn't breathe. He wasn't a man who cried. He hadn't cried at funerals. He hadn't cried at business betrayals. He hadn't cried when enemies died. But now his eyes burned. Because he finally understood something. Avery never tried to replace Ethan's mother. She had simply refused to let a grieving child suffer alone. And for that kindness, she was being destroyed. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Gabriel entered. One look at Victor's face told him something significant had happened. "What is it?" Victor stared at the documents scattered across the desk. Then he spoke quietly, dangerously quietly. "I was wrong." Gabriel raised an eyebrow. That sentence almost never left Victor Morel's mouth. Victor stood. The atmosphere inside the room shifted instantly. The same energy that made rivals fear him filled the space. Except this time it wasn't directed at enemies. It was directed at injustice. "They're holding the review tomorrow." Gabriel nodded. Yes. Victor picked up Ethan's drawing, carefully, almost reverently. Then he looked toward the Manhattan skyline. The city belonged to men like him, men with power, men with influence, men who could change outcomes. For weeks, Avery Collins had stood alone while everyone questioned her character. That ended now, because Victor Morel finally knew the truth. And when the most powerful man in the room decides to stand beside you, everything changes. The board review was scheduled for 9 o'clock on a gray Thursday morning. By 8:30, the auditorium was already full. Parents filled the seats. Teachers lined the walls. Administrators shuffled paperwork nervously. Everyone knew this hearing was no longer about policy. It had become a public trial, and Avery Collins was the defendant. As she entered the room, dozens of eyes followed her, some sympathetic, some curious, others openly judgmental. Avery felt every stare. She wore a simple dark blue dress beneath a long cardigan. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive, just professional. Yet years of being judged for her appearance suddenly returned all at once. She became painfully aware of her plus-size frame, the softness of her body, the way certain people looked at her before deciding who she was. Her hands trembled slightly, not because she had done anything wrong, because she was tired. Tired of defending her character, tired of proving her worth, tired of being measured against assumptions. At the opposite side of the room sat Victoria Morel, elegant as always. Perfect posture, perfect smile, perfect image. The picture of sophistication. If someone didn't know better, they would think she was attending a charity gala, not orchestrating someone's destruction. The board chairman called the meeting to order. Formal statements began. Policy reviews, procedural explanations, legal language. Then the accusations started. One parent stood first. "I believe professional boundaries were crossed." Another followed. The relationship became inappropriate. A third added, "Certain students received preferential treatment." Each statement was carefully worded. Just vague enough to avoid legal consequences. Just damaging enough to poison opinions. Avery sat quietly, listening, absorbing, enduring. Then Victoria stood, and the room instantly paid attention. She carried influence, money, status. People listened when she spoke. "I want to be clear," Victoria began softly. "This is not personal. The biggest lies usually started that way. My concern is Ethan." She paused dramatically. "My nephew is vulnerable." Several people nodded. Victoria continued. "After losing his mother, he became emotionally dependent on an employee who was never trained to occupy such a role." Avery felt her stomach drop. The words were devastating because they sounded reasonable. That was Victoria's gift. She wrapped cruelty inside concern. The room grew quieter. Then even worse. Victoria looked directly at Avery. I believe certain relationships were encouraged rather than discouraged. The implication hung heavily in the air. Several parents exchanged looks. The damage was working. For the first time, Avery stood. Her voice shook initially, but only initially. I never encouraged dependency. Silence. I encouraged healing. No one interrupted. I listened to a child who was grieving. Her eyes moved through the audience. I never asked for recognition. She swallowed hard. I never asked for influence. Another breath. And I certainly never asked to become the target of rumors. The room remained still. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others avoided eye contact entirely. Avery continued. I did my job. Her voice cracked slightly. But more importantly, she looked toward Ethan, who sat quietly near the back. I cared. For a moment, emotion filled the room. Real emotion, not manipulation, not performance, just truth. Yet, Victoria wasn't finished. She calmly produced a folder. The issue isn't intention. She opened it. The issue is judgment. Inside were photographs, copies of notes, records of visits, context carefully removed, presented in the worst possible light. Avery felt her pulse racing. This was exactly what Victoria had planned, not to prove wrongdoing, to create doubt. And doubt was often enough. The chairman looked uneasy. Board members whispered among themselves. The atmosphere shifted. Avery could feel it. She was losing. Then, the auditorium doors opened. Every head turned. The room fell completely silent. Victor Morel had arrived. He wasn't scheduled to attend. Nobody expected him. The reaction was immediate. Teachers straightened. Parents stopped whispering. Even board members looked nervous. Victor moved through the room with the calm confidence of a man accustomed to power. Tall, imposing, immaculately dressed. The kind of man whose presence changed the temperature of a room. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on one person, Avery. She looked stunned. Victoria looked concerned. For the first time all morning, Victor approached the front slowly. The chairman cleared his throat. Mr. Morel, I'll be brief. His deep voice filled the auditorium effortlessly. Nobody interrupted. Nobody dared. Victor turned toward the board. For weeks, this woman has been accused of manipulating my son. Silence. I investigated those accusations myself. Victoria's confidence flickered. Just slightly. Victor continued. I reviewed every record. Every eye remained locked on him. I spoke with counselors. No. Teachers. Staff. And most importantly, his voice softened. My son. The room held its breath. Victor reached into his jacket, then placed a stack of documents on the table. The evidence is overwhelming. Victoria relaxed slightly. She thought she knew what was coming. She was wrong. Victor looked directly at Avery, then back at the audience. The evidence proves that Avery Collins did something none of us managed to do. A long pause followed. His next words shattered the room. She noticed a child who was suffering while the rest of us were too distracted to see him. Complete silence. Victor stepped forward. Every sentence landed harder than the last. When Ethan stopped eating, she noticed. When he was being bullied, she noticed. When his grades dropped, she noticed. When he cried himself to sleep, missing his mother. Victor's voice almost broke. She noticed. Many people lowered their eyes, ashamed. Victor continued. I am Ethan's father. The admission seemed to cost him something, and I missed things she saw immediately. Avery stared at him in shock. So did everyone else. Victoria attempted to intervene. Victor, no. The single word stopped her cold. The temperature in the room changed instantly. For the first time, people remembered exactly who Victor Morel was. Not the businessman, not the donor. The man nobody challenged. He turned toward his sister. His eyes were ice. "You didn't protect Ethan." Victoria froze. Victor's voice remained calm, dangerously calm. "You used him." The accusation hit like a thunderclap. Gasps spread through the audience. Victoria's face lost color. Victor wasn't finished. "You manufactured suspicion. You spread rumors. You attacked the only person who consistently showed up for him." The room exploded into whispers. Board members exchanged alarmed looks. Everything was unraveling, and suddenly the woman who had spent weeks being judged wasn't standing alone anymore. The silence that followed Victor's words felt almost unreal. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire auditorium seemed frozen in place. For weeks, Avery Collins had been the person everyone questioned. Now, for the first time, people were questioning themselves. Victoria Morell's composure finally cracked. Only slightly, but it was enough. The confident smile disappeared. The carefully constructed image began to crumble. "That's ridiculous," she said sharply. Her voice lacked the certainty it once carried. Victor didn't even look at her. His attention remained fixed on the board members, on the parents, on every person who had helped turn a compassionate school nurse into a target. "The accusations against Avery Collins are not supported by facts." His voice echoed through the room. "They are supported by assumptions." Nobody argued, because deep down, everyone knew he was right. Victor continued. "Some of you saw a plus-size woman spending time with a wealthy child and decided there had to be an agenda." Avery lowered her eyes. The words struck deeply because they were true. Too true. Victor wasn't finished. "You judged her before examining the evidence." 9. His gaze swept across the room. "You assumed her kindness was manipulation." Another painful silence followed. "And that's a reflection of your character, not hers." The statement hit harder than any threat, because it exposed something uncomfortable. People preferred believing in hidden motives. It was easier than accepting genuine kindness. The chairman cleared his throat. His face was visibly red. After reviewing the documentation presented by Mr. Morell, and after examining the complete records, the board has reached a decision. Avery's pulse raced. The room held its breath. "All allegations are dismissed." A collective murmur spread through the audience. The chairman continued. "There is no evidence of misconduct, no evidence of boundary violations, no evidence of inappropriate behavior. In fact," he paused, "we believe Nurse Collins has demonstrated exceptional dedication to student welfare." Avery closed her eyes. The relief was immediate, overwhelming. For weeks, she had carried fear everywhere. Fear of losing her job, fear of losing her reputation, fear of becoming another person destroyed by rumors. And now it was over. Not because she fought back, because the truth finally arrived. Then something unexpected happened. People began standing. One teacher, then another, then several parents. The applause started quietly, almost uncertain, before growing louder and louder and louder, until the entire auditorium was filled with it. Avery stared in disbelief, her eyes filled with tears. Not because she wanted recognition, because she never expected it. Across the room, Ethan smiled, the biggest smile she had ever seen from him, and somehow that meant more than everything else combined. A few minutes later, the meeting ended. People slowly filtered out. The crowd dispersed. Eventually, only a handful remained. Victor stood near the front of the room, waiting. For perhaps the first time in his life, he looked nervous. When Avery approached, neither spoke immediately. The silence felt different now, softer, warmer, more honest. Finally, Victor broke it. "I'm sorry." The words surprised her. Men like Victor Morell rarely apologized. Men like Victor Morell rarely admitted mistakes. Yet here he was, doing both. "I judged you." Avery smiled faintly. Yes. A surprising laugh escaped him. The first genuine laugh she had heard, I deserve that." They stood quietly for a moment. Then Victor looked down, almost embarrassed. "I spent years believing I could solve every problem by providing more." Avery listened. More money, more security, more protection. His eyes drifted toward Ethan. "But grief doesn't care how much money you have." Avery's expression softened. "No, it doesn't." Victor nodded slowly. "I thought I was protecting him." The admission hurt, but I wasn't really seeing him. Avery understood, because she had seen versions of this story many times. Parents weren't always absent because they didn't care. Sometimes they were simply lost. Sometimes they were hurting too. The difference was whether they chose to learn. Victor had, and that mattered. A small voice suddenly interrupted them. "Can we get ice cream?" Both adults looked down. Ethan stood between them, hopeful, optimistic, looking more like a child than he had in months. Avery laughed. Victor laughed too. "I think that's a reasonable request." 3 hours later, they sat together at a small, family-owned ice cream shop in Brooklyn. No bodyguards, no board members, no accusations, no rumors. Just 3 people sharing a simple afternoon. Ethan talked almost non-stop. About school, about books, about baseball, about everything. Victor listened carefully, actually listened. And every few minutes, Avery caught him watching his son with an expression she had never seen before. Presence. Real presence. Weeks turned into months. The academy moved on. The rumors disappeared. People found new subjects to gossip about, as they always did. But some things changed permanently. Victor began attending school events, parent conferences, baseball games, art exhibitions, small moments, the moments he once missed. Meanwhile, Ethan continued visiting Avery's office, not because he was lonely anymore, because she had become family. And eventually, something else changed too. The distance between Avery and Victor slowly disappeared. Not through grand gestures, not through dramatic confessions, but through trust. Conversations became longer. Smiles became easier. Friendship became something deeper. And one evening, nearly a year after the hearing, Victor found himself standing beside Avery on the academy courtyard. The sun was setting. Students had gone home. The campus was quiet. "You know," Victor said softly, "I spent most of my life believing strength meant never needing anyone." Avery smiled. And he looked at her, really looked at her, at the woman everyone had underestimated. The woman who never realized how extraordinary she was. The woman whose kindness changed his son's life. And his. I was wrong. His hand found hers. Warm, certain, comfortable. For once, Avery didn't pull away. Victor smiled, then spoke the words that would eventually become legendary among everyone who knew the story. "The woman everyone accused of wanting something from my family." He glanced toward Ethan, laughing with friends across the field. "Was the only person who gave my son what money never could." Avery's eyes filled with tears. Not sad tears, the kind that arrive after surviving something difficult, the kind that arrive when you're finally seen. And for the first time in a very long time, nobody was looking at her weight. Nobody was judging her appearance. Nobody was questioning her motives. They were seeing what had been there all along. A good woman, a kind heart, a protector, a healer. Someone who changed lives simply by caring. And in the end, that mattered far more than anything else.